So a lot of the workshops that I cover, first of all, are feature predominantly edit mode, just because some of the more I guess functionally, some of the more advanced functions you can do in ACDC have to do with layers and masking. It's also an area that's of common interest, as well as kind of commonly a lot of misinformation about how to use layers. So I focus a lot on that. Today, we're going to be looking at develop mode because ostensibly in ACDC develop mode is our raw editor. We'll talk about why that is. Um, and then we're going to just look at things like, for one, we're going to be talking pretty extensively about sidecar files. So just getting a really good understanding of how edit mode works versus how develop mode works. And then we're going to be looking at actual developments. So, like how you make developments in develop mode is different from how you make edits in edit mode. While those modes have very similar tools, the sort of user interface as well as the way that those edits or changes are articulated are different. Oh, yeah. Thanks. Thank you, Misty. I'll get rid of that. We're good. We started. I'm looking at the other screen, not seeing that I have a notepad on my other screen. So thank you. And then we'll just talk a little bit about presets as well, because I think that they're a really handy method to sort of understand how to make bulk edits and develop mode. I suppose that's actually one of the strongest things you could do is go through the process of making presets and snapshots and that sort of thing. Okay, so where should we begin? The first thing we should begin is we'll just back up. We'll come out of a develop mode, right? We're going to go into manage mode. Um, so raw files are files that are going to be taken alongside, typically or exclusively, from your camera. They will be a proprietary file. So and what I mean by that is it means, to a certain extent, I kind of mean it's a copyrighted file from the maker of, pardon me, of the camera model. So Canon has different, makes and raw files that are going to be proprietary to it, versus something like Sony or Olympus or something like that. And so what that means is what we can think about it of a raw file. A raw file is a generalized term for a proprietary file from basically from a camera model or a camera company. Um, what does this mean? Well, a lot of people ask like, "Hey, Adam, how do I open up? How do I save a raw file?" And the reason why this is a bit more of a complicated question is because raw files are like for example, these images that we have here. Let's just take a look here. There's our info preview series right here tells us a lot about where this tells us a lot about these photos. For one, there's this little raw icon that appears on the top right hand corner of our image, which indicates to us that it's raw, which I don't know differentiates it's from a JPEG of the same manner. The second thing is that this information pops up when it populates a variety of different information about the file. For example, we see how large the photo is in terms of its horizontal and vertical dimensions. We see how big the file is. Raw files are typically going to be quite a bit bigger than a JPEG file. And the reason why is they contain a lot of information that oftentimes when you're editing images, what you're doing is you're going to be essentially you're going to be compartmentalizing that and you're going to be saving a file that's going to be ultimately smaller than your raw file. And by smaller, I mean in terms of file size and also in terms of quality. We also see the model of the file, the actual camera. Let's see if I can bring that up in a way that's easier to see. It doesn't list it here, but I believe this were taken with a Sony. And then it lists things like, ISO, so taken at 200, and the f-stop and the shutter speed and that sort of thing. So we get this information about this file that perhaps differentiates it from a JPEG file. Certain JPEG files are, let's see here. Yeah, they'll list that information as well, but because they're writable files versus a raw file, which is not a writable file, this information will be already set in the JPEG and can be actually removed, versus the raw file where that information is not removable. Let's see if I can bring up the make and model of this. I believe it should be in the metadata here, but I think if I open up in develop mode, I can actually show you this in better detail. Yeah, here it is. We'll come back to this, but basically this was taken with a Sony Alpha 7. So this was taken by one of our developers actually at ACDC. Okay, so we have that these are raw files. We know roughly what's going on in terms of their metadata here, so we understand that. Um, what I was saying is, when we looking at a raw file, the way that it's treated differently than a writable file is that when we try to edit these files, say I open them up in edit mode, for example, like this guy right here, and I make an exposure adjustment to this image. For example, let's just make a quick exposure adjustment using a filter here. I will just increase the exposure just because it's a little bit low. If I was to go about saving this image, okay, so I can click File, or actually I'll click Done first and foremost, and then I will go to File and Save. I think what's going to happen in this case is it's going to prompt me, regardless of whether I click Save or Save As, to save it as a new file. And note that the file type that pops up when we come to save this file is not going to be raw. In fact, actually, if you see in this list here, there is no raw file. The highest file format in terms of file quality that is offered to you to save a file in edit mode is going to be a TIFF file. TIFF files are quite large. They're a really they're a good file format if you're trying to preserve image quality. This is going to be different from, say, a ACDSee file format, which is a non-destructive file that we offer that enables non-destructive editing, and then all the regular characters like JPEGs, PNGs, BMPs, GIFs, that sort of thing. So just to keep in mind that I'm not actually offered a means to save this as a raw file. And the question is why? Well, the reason why, and this is really important to understand, is that raw files, and this is the case for all photo editing softwares. So if I was to bring up a competing raw, photo editing software in the example of Adobe or something like that, you are also not going to be able to save save as a raw file format. There's a reason for this. Earlier, I mentioned that raw files are proprietary. What I mean by this is that the sort of the way that that file is understood and saved and encoded and that sort of thing is essentially proprietary secret information in regards to the camera maker. And so when they make that raw file, they don't give that information out willingly. That information is sort of a part of their intellectual property and what they hold as makers of a specific camera. And so that interpretation of a raw file, in order to engage with it from a photo editing perspective, we actually have to interpret a raw file kind of differently than the way that that we're offered, the tools that we're given with engaging with a particular raw file, whether it be Sony or Canon or Olympus or whatever, Nikon. So takeaways here are, if we were in edit mode, and the reason why we don't typically engage with edit mode to save and edit raw images is because it's always going to be prompting you to save it as a therefore lesser file format in terms of file quality, in terms of file size. So what we do is we edit our raw images in develop mode. And so develop mode offers different tools and strategies by which to actually change the visual appearance of your raw files. Are people with me so far? Raw mode is, at least in the way that we handle raw editing in develop mode. If I open up a file in develop mode does something very different when we're editing a file. For example, if I was to do the same change in this case, if I was to adjust exposure in my image, the way that this is interpreted is one of the things you'll know right away when you're engaging with develop mode is that there is no like direct saving process. Like when I'm finished making an exposure adjustment to this image and I navigate away to manage mode, that adjustment is live. And in ACDSee, we call this parametric editing. It just means that all of those edits that we make are applied simultaneously and just held within the image itself, which is different from editing, where we actually have to go through the saving process in order to finalize our file. Um, the other thing we notice is that when we're editing in develop mode, many of you who have edited in develop mode, regardless of whether it's a JPEG, a RAW file, what have you, will see that there's this little development icon that appears in the bottom left-hand corner. This development icon indicates to us that develop changes have been made to this image. And it also indicates to me that if I navigate back into this file using develop itself, you can see that those changes are stored or held. And the exposure adjustment that we made just now is held within those changes and therefore is visible to us when we open up the file. Okay, so navigating back to manage mode, when we edit a raw file in develop mode, the way that these changes are saved, the fact that I can very much open up this image in develop mode and have them be saved next time I open up ACDSee indicates to me that this information is being stored, but how? This information is being stored in something called a sidecar file. So let's see if I can visualize this for everyone. Here we are. If you want to, I wouldn't recognize, sorry, sidecar files, what they contain is adjustments to an image. And so when you're editing an image, a raw image in develop mode, you're not actually editing the raw file itself. What you're editing is the sidecar file, which is referenced when you open up that image. So this sidecar file contains all these fields, information like exposure values, highlight values, white balance, the geometry of your image, repair. These are all fields that are contained within the sidecar file and are referenced when you open up the image. What this means is that we're not actually editing the raw file. We're using that raw file we're referencing. What you are seeing right here is a representation of the raw file. It's essentially like it's like a JPEG thumbnail of your raw file. And then when we make adjustments to your image, that would apply, right? And then it is shown to you with this thumbnail here. And then when we go to move away from it or navigate away back to manage mode, for example, all of those adjustments that we've made in develop mode are then saved into that sidecar file and referenced every single time we open up that file. So this is a really handy way of getting around that proprietary problem where, like any photo editing software, isn't really able to open up and save that file individually or save changes to that file. But what we can do is save the sidecar file that's attached to that raw file. And then when we want to finally, when we're ready to save this file after making a series of adjustments, we will then be forced, right, to save that as a subsequent file type. So we would save it as a TIFF file in the case of a raw editing. But during the process of editing, we can always reference it. We can reference that original raw file. So my point is, ultimately, where I'm going with this, this is the case, David, in all versions of ACDSee. Oh, let me open up my Q&A, actually. That's probably... this is the case in all of our softwares. This has been the case since develop mode was initiated. So all of these, the processes that I'm describing will be the case for any ACDSee that you're working with that has develop mode in it, which in the case of right now is CB. That's actually the subject of a tutorial I'm going to be talking about. It is a bit beside the point of this workshop, but if you write it in the Q&A, I'll get to it at the very end of the workshop. I'd love to talk about it. I don't want to shut you down. I'm going to get to it at the end rather than stop the flow of the workshop for talking about it. Thank you. Okay, so our takeaways here are this before we move on to the next step, right? Our takeaways are that when we're editing uh, a raw file, we can open it up in something like edit mode, but we're going to be forced right away to save the file down when we go to make our changes as a quote unquote lesser file type because it has less visual quality and it will be a smaller file. When we open up an image in develop mode, that process is sort of halted in the sense that we can make changes to our image right away. And those changes are saved in the sidecar file that the raw file then references whenever we open it. Um, at some point, if we're like, if we want to make adjustments to our image and we want to save that as a hard copy file and we need to send it to a client or something like that, we will be forced to save it as some form of file type like a JPEG or a TIFF or something like that. But for the purpose of editing, we can edit a raw file using developer without actually making any adjustments or saving the image down. Okay, so here's the other thing. So a common question we have is, well, what is a sidecar file and where can I see it? If I go to filter within manage mode, upon a development, upon some form of a development in ACDSee, the sidecar file is created. When I open up the filter section here and I go all the way down to advanced filters, this is just in manage mode. When I click on that, there's this ability that I can actually, in the configure filters here, I can actually show these by showing hidden files and folders, and I believe it's an XMP file. The XMP file is actually what the sidecar file is. I'm just using its kind of generalized term, but that's what it is. So what this is going to do is it's going to show any hidden folders, and it's also going to show the file itself. And there we go. So as you can see, there's two images in my folder, these two right here, that have developments associated with them. And as you can see, there are two sidecar files that are associated with those images. They appear right here. If I click on this, it should be listed as an XMP file. There it is. So that is that XMP file that's associated with this image, or it looks like, pardon me, with this image. So there's the file right there. And then as you can see here, this is our image right here, and then this is our corresponding XMP file right here. There's also this develop folder. This contains a sort of an ongoing series of edits to this image, and those are sort of referenced in this folder right here. So these are these hidden files and folders that we don't see when we're going through this process of editing. The point being is that these sidecar files do exist. Looks like I said there's these two here. There's this one here as well. These sidecar files do exist, and they contain those edits that you've made when you're editing in develop mode. Now, a lot of you might be saying, well, this is like kind of beyond maybe looking at the filters, say, in develop mode. How do I use these filters? The reason why I'm starting with that is actually interesting, Misty. I didn't know that. So Misty was just saying that the corresponding method that a company like Adobe would do is perhaps using this THM file, which is a similar system. But the point is that like at a certain point, regardless of what changes you make to a raw file, using develop mode, using these filters, using things like tune and develop and different presets and such on your image, you're going to have some understanding of what's happening with these files. And that isn't to say that develop mode isn't just a very useful tool and you can edit, JPEG files or RAW files and still get the output you want. But at a certain point, you're going to try to save your file. And you're going to go, okay, well, why can't I save it as a raw file? It already is a raw file. Why wouldn't I be able to do that? And so the point of me starting here is I really want to create literacy around like what a raw file is and how they actually work. And the reason why is because when I started at ACDSee a long time ago and started looking at raw files myself, I come from a graphic design background, and so I wasn't even familiar with this file type. So I didn't really understand the workings of this file type either. I understood how to edit images, as somebody who worked with images quite frequently and needed to open up and make adjustments to them. But I didn't really understand how the background of this worked, the sort of what's happening in the background when you're editing a file. So because it was interesting and valuable to me, I sort of start with this whenever I begin workshops talking about. Um, okay, there's one other thing that comes up, and this is a very common question. The question is, if I move a file in ACDSee, a raw file, what happens to that sidecar file? And this is a fascinating and important question. So I'm going to turn those off. I'm just going to unhide both. In ACDSee, if I move a file, if I move these files, for example, those sidecar files are going to be moved alongside them. So if I simply click this, copy it, right? And then I navigate to this above folder and I paste it. Pardon me. You can see that it's pasted. And then as it was pasted there, it was pasted alongside that developments folder and that XMP file that we had. When I refreshed, they disappeared, meaning that they were moved alongside the file. Now, I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe if I have turned on show hidden files and folders, I believe that when I take one of these files, perhaps this one right here, and just move it itself, I believe these should still be moved. They are. The difference is when I'm moving a file using Windows that has a corresponding XMP file associated with it. So if I had found the same folder, which I believe is the HDR folder, and I'd moved this raw file, the corresponding XMP file that's associated with it will not be moved when we move this file manually. So a thing to note that when we're moving raw files, just be mindful to also use ACDSee to move them, because then those raw files are carried with it, and we don't essentially lose the sidecar file in the process of editing our file. So the takeaways from this are basically as such: we can see those sidecar files. We don't need to. We don't gain anything necessarily by seeing them. It's just a means to understand how this works. But if we are moving a file, we would recommend moving the raw files that have had developments associated with them in ACDSee, because that ensures that that sidecar file is also moved alongside them. Okay, let's talk about the next process of the develop mode. So we talked about sidecar files. We talked about how raw is basically interpreted in ACDSee, and we talked about like what you can and can't do with images. Marv, is the sidecar file in JPEG files? That's actually a good question. I believe it is, but I'd have to check. So here's that JPEG image right here, Marv. I think if we go in and just edit it really quickly in develop mode, let's make an exposure adjustment and leave. I believe it's done it, but it might also be saved to the file itself. Yeah, I think it's possible that because JPEG files are fully writable, that which is different from a raw file, that the sidecar file is not necessary in the case of a JPEG, because it contains all of these like blank fields that can be filled out by ACDSee when it goes to write and make changes associated with an image. So the takeaway here is raw files, because they are essentially they're kind of read-only in a way. We would need to create that file, but in the case of a JPEG, it looks like it's not necessary because it's a writable file and you can add information to it. Great question. That was just sort of like a quick check for me to do there, but okay. Let's go navigate back. Let's go back into this image here, and let's actually talk about developments. So when you open up an image, and this is probably reiterative for some people in this workshop, but essentially develop mode works similarly to edit mode, and then it has a filter panel, and that filter panel appears on the left hand side here. I'm just going to reset my image back to its original values. Filters are sort of interpreted in 4 tabs, and we can see these tabs up at the top. So there's tune, detail, geometry, and repair. Tune handles color and lighting. Detail handles. I said the term I use for it is somewhat like granularity in an image, but essentially differentiation between pixels. It adds, in this case, it sharpens image. It deals with noise reduction, skin tune, so it smooths surfaces. And then there's also a feature called chromatic aberration, which removes the effect of chromatic aberration. If you're curious what this is, at the at the edge of an image where certain colors may look like they have a little halo with a particular corresponding opposite color. So if you had magenta, you'd see a little cyan halo that appears around it. That's aberration, and it can be removed using chromatic aberration. So if you're curious about that, that's what it is. Um, geometry addresses the shape of your image, and in terms of because all of the development tools are sort of applied at the same time, geometry is the change that is applied very last after any other corresponding visual adjustments to an image. But this handles things like perspective, rotate and straighten, crop, vignette correction, and importantly, lens correction, which we should talk about soon. And then lastly is things like repair. Repair is probably the most familiar tool for most people. It's where we would make things like a clone or heel adjustment on our image to remove blemishes or objects that we don't want to see in our image, referencing the image itself. And then that's a good question. Peter asked, as an aside, is it possible to rearrange the order of the tabs in develop mode? I don't believe so, actually, but that's a really valid question. It for some users, Tune is the penultimate tool that you're going to use, and then for others, maybe they're just correcting geometry because they actually like the way that their photo looks. Peter, I would actually pose this as a question to our developers on the Connect page. I don't think so. Just to be clear, I know that you can move the development tools panel itself, but not reorganize, tune, detail, geometry, and repair within the function. If anyone's curious what I'm doing right now, if you ever grab a tab itself, grab, click, hold, and pull away, it's going to give you the opportunity to actually reorient where this tab is. And you can see as I'm grabbing it, these little pop-ups appear on my image here that showcase all these locations that I can apply this tab. And so this gives me the ability to customize my UI. Customized UI means that when I open up or navigate to this image in the future using develop mode or any other image in develop mode, this UI is going to be saved. I don't typically mess around with develop mode, but I have certain changes that I make to edit mode because I use it a lot. But if I liked my development tools on this right-hand panel here, I could move it there, and then I would reference it from this side here. Anyway, neat functionality. So, where was I? I was talking about repair, tune, detail, and geometry. Let's take a little stop at geometry right now, actually. So geometry allows us to do the following. The easiest to understand, obviously, are rotate and straighten. That quite literally rotates our images, and that allows us, once we have established a rotation that we like, if we navigate to Tune tab, for example, that rotation will be held with our image. So you might notice that when we finish an edit in develop mode, such as this geometry rotation, this little blue icon that appears next to our image, or next to, the adjustment, which is rotate and straighten in this case. This indicates to me that this is a live development. And this blue icon next to the geometry tab itself right here indicates that a change has been made to the geometry of our image more broadly. So we can see when we click on geometry that rotate and straighten is active. And then if we were to navigate away, we can see that geometry has adjustments to it. Now, I said earlier that these are essentially saved. They're parametrically saved as an ongoing process when we engage with ACDSee. So if I navigate back to manage mode, you can see that our development is active. We know that there are developments to this image. And if I navigate to develop mode itself, these adjustments are saved, right? They appear saved because we can see that little blue icon right here and the corresponding rotate and straighten. If at any point I don't like my adjustment, I can always click the reset on the individual adjustment itself, or I can click on a master reset. Master reset will apply a reset to everything we've done to the image at the same time. As I mentioned also, there's perspective and crop. So crop is quite I don't know how to describe crop, but it would basically reduce the size of our image. We can never expand, create our image bigger, but we can always reduce the size of it. And it will allow us to either hold the aspect ratio. So the aspect ratio being, hey, approximately this degree of width to this degree of height. And even if we make it smaller, it's going to hold on to that relationship. Versus if we were to remove that by clicking constrain crop proportion, we could actually change that relationship entirely and move our crop around our image as we see fit. Crop enables us to focus on specific focal elements in our image and use those. I'm not going to crop this image. I'm actually going to undo the rotate and straighten here as well. And then let's talk about perspective. Perspective changes something different. It would change the, I guess I think the term is shear, but it sort of engages with a different axes. So vertical shear, so we can pull this image, seemingly pull it back or pull it up. And as you can see, that changes it versus horizontal shearing, which pulls it further to the right, vice versa, and vertical shear, which then pulls the sides down. So these might be useful in correcting your image if the or in some way the perspective isn't correct in the image, or you want to create an effect by adding an additional perspective. Perhaps the most interesting for everyone is a lens correction profile. So I mentioned this earlier. This is quite unique. A lens correction profile is a sort of it's a way of interpreting the camera's inherent perspective that it has. So when we use this lens correction profile, or when we enable it, depending on the make and model of our camera, there may be a perspective a correction for that camera model, which will interpret sort of the way that the camera takes an image and then tries to create a stable default for it. What do I mean by this? I guess what I mean by this is if I was to enable this lens profile, you can see that my image is shifted. It's shifted in that way. And so when we take this photo here, what it's doing is it's correcting for that. And we can enable that profile that corresponds to this make, so the Sony, the model, the Alpha 7, and the actual lens that I took the image at. Some people really like enabling lens profile on their image to get that sort of unique effect. This is quite interesting in that this information is not provided to ACDSee or anyone actually by the maker of the camera itself. This information actually be accrued by a series of very sort of passionate third party that then provide that information essentially as an open source, which we then reference for this tool. So these makes and models are not always going to be present for your particular camera, and the reason why is because this is something that's developed by passionate people that we then interpret for the purpose of specific makes and models of cameras. Now that being said, there are a lot of cameras, makes, and models here, and I'm sure that for the most part, most of you will have your cameras there. It is often the most recent or new cameras that are lacking the make and model lens profile, which is then updated later. So these are you can enable these. They sort of give you the effect of having that sort of camera's inherent qualities sort of represented in your image. Okay, so we have talked about geometry more broadly. Repair, let's go on to the detail tab, and then we can talk about tune, which is the largest of the lot. One of the things you'll notice in tune and detail is that there's a tab that's associated or called masking. And masking enables you to make selective adjustments. Without masking, you will be making generalized adjustments to your image. Generalized adjustments apply to the whole image universally. So for example, in sharpening, if I was to apply a sharpening adjustment to my whole image here, let's see if I can get something that looks really intense. That looks really intense. Sharpening is applied to the whole image non-discriminately. versus masking enables us to be more selective about where we want an adjustment to be applied. And this masking can be understood as very similar to the masking in edit mode, except there's less steps in regards to creating a mask. So when I open up masking, I'm going to be given a couple of options. Pardon me. There's the subject, or rather AI masking. So if our image has an obvious subject, an obvious background, an obvious sky, or objects that are in the foreground, we can use AI masking to make, pardon me, selections predicated on those qualities. What's going to happen when I go to click one of these, I think if I click sky here, this might give an example here. It's going to create a active selection of our sky. Note that our sky is also interpreted in a reflection, right? And then it gives us the ability to engage specific adjustments to a part of our image. So, for example, if I just turn off show mask for a moment here, which is that red outline, that red outline indicates to me that this part of our image is going to receive adjustments when we make them. If I was to increase these values, for example, that's going to only apply to the areas that we've selected. So masking represents a really unique way to select parts of our image. Let's just reset really quickly. So that was just, for example, a sky mask. There's also manual masking methods. So there's things like the brush, the gradient, and radial gradient tool. We'll just show the brush for now. The brush enables us to brush on particular areas of our image that we want to apply an adjustment to. So if I wanted to kind of inversely just affect the boats in my image, I would draw a selection on this subject right here. And then from there, I can make corresponding detail masking adjustments like sharpness and noise reduction and that sort of thing that apply to these particular layers or this particular mask of our image. The final one to understand, so manual masking works very similar with gradient and radial gradient. Radial gradient would apply a gradient in the shape of a circle or oblong shape, and then gradient would be applied like linearly. Then there's also something called range masking, and range masking is predicated on brightness values or color hue values in our image. So, for example, if I was to go into luminance, I'd be searching for parts of my image that correspond to a certain spectrum of brightness. I could focus on darker parts of my image and remove lighter parts of my image, and then apply a sharpness to those dark parts of our image, for example. And then you can see that that is applied in mostly the shadows in the water here. If I was to pull this range further out, you could see that my clouds have started to be affected by it because I've widened the range of brightness in my image. So masking, the thing to understand really about masking is that there's three sort of broad categories of options that are allotted to you. There's AI masking in the form of either subject, background, sky, or objects. So these are going to be searching for those qualities in your image, and then you can make changes predicated on what was found. Manual masking is entirely predicated upon what you want to select, and then those adjustments will be made accordingly. Range masking is based on values of your image associated with the brightness of your image, so the degree to which something is black or white, or a hue, the degree to which something is a particular color. Thank you so much, Anne, for participating. As mentioned previously in some other workshops, I upload all of these to YouTube. So if you're waiting for a particular workshop, it should be uploaded soon. We're having an issue with our YouTube right now that we're trying to address. So those are coming, but I will upload these regardless. They all get uploaded to YouTube. CB asked, can you tune your AI mask, like deselect the water from the sky selection? This is a really good question. Yes. So let's make CB's adjustment. In the case, I'm going to take the sky here. I'm going to make an AI mask of the sky. And what I'm going to do is I'll just show the mask to verify this. What I can do here is once this mask is live, I can actually remove the reflection portion by right-clicking and sort of erasing it. And what I'm doing here is I'm just taking a section that we've created automatically using essentially AI functionality. And then I'm right clicking, which either left clicking adds or right clicking removes a already pre-existing selection on your image. So then once you've removed part of your selection, the mask will be adjusted. So the mask CB is only corresponding to the sky in this image. I've now removed it entirely from my the reflection or the foreground. From there, we can add the sharpness, and as you can see, predicated on the mask, which is this red guy right here, it will adjust the mask only. So no longer is it affecting the reflection. That's a really good question. One that might not be as obvious in the same regards. The AI masking and the brush masking are quite similar in that regard. The gradients might not make as much of sense, so I'll explain it really quickly. So I have a mask here, and you can see that I can't really interact with the brush on this. So even if I was to increase the sharpness in it, like I have here, which applies to, I guess, the top of my image here, how would I address this? Well, I can right click a mask like gradient, for example, which doesn't give me the ability to brush because it already has this function of me adjusting the sort of radial effect or the gradient effect. But I can always just right click on a mask once I'm stably happy with my gradient, and I can convert it to a brush. And then from there, I can say, well, I actually don't want it to apply to these boats in the center. So that effect of correcting an either AI or a mask that like a gradient mask, all of that is something that we can deal with either in the tool it's directly or by just right clicking on it and making sure to convert it to a brush mask, which gives us the ability to edit it from a standpoint of manual adjustments. Okay, so we've talked about repair, we've talked a little bit about geometry, we've talked about detail, and then we've importantly sort of broken down how masking works. Now, I mentioned that masking is a function of detail as well as tune. So Tune has a lot of tools with it, and I won't be going over all of them today. But one thing to also note is that Tune has its own corresponding masks associated with it. Tune is dealing with brightness and color in a way that detail is dealing with sort of granularity of our image, sort of the dimensions of the individual pixels in our image. So when we engage with Tune, and let's say we do that same sky adjustment, we're going to have different mask tools associated with it. For example, when I apply an AI selection of the sky here, you can see that a whole bunch of tools pop up within the mask section. Let's just turn off the mask for a moment here. So for one, exposure, obviously. Saturation. So saturation is going to, let's see if we can get some saturation in this image. That's actually quite a bit nicer than it was previously. Pull in some exposure too. So we can add some exposure to this image. We can add saturation. So it's going to take our colors and it's going to make them more saturated. Vibrance. Vibrance is like saturation for skin. It kind of looks at all of those colors other than the spectrum of orange and then adjusts them accordingly. Orange is very interesting as a spectrum of light because it impacts skin quite significantly. All skin, regardless of one's sort of skin color, is going to be interpreted as some shade of orange. And so when we adjust saturation, saturation is going to be orange inclusive, and vibrance is going to be orange inclusive, but to a very small extent. So if you're ever curious what the difference between saturation and vibrance is going to be a saturation effect that you can use for images that contain people in it. Otherwise, what you might see is a saturation effect that makes all of your people in your image look very bright orange, which is obviously really silly. So use vibrance instead for images containing people. Temperature changes obviously the temperature of our image. So if I pull it to more of a yellow spectrum or blue, I can really change the values there. And then tint is corrective to either cyan or magenta there. Fill, light, contrast, clarity, etc. The other thing I'll note is that there's also a color EQ tab within the masking portion here and a tone curves tab. tone curves is pretty simple. Regardless of what your image is here, you can also adjust the, I guess, the brightness curve as well as the R, G, and B curves as well. So, for example, if you thought your image was too blue, you could use this curve tab to, say, remove some blues from the highlights. Color EQ is a bit more in depth in that there's a 4 subsections here that are associated with it. So there's saturation. So that's going to adjust the saturation of a particular color. For example, we can maybe further saturate blue. Um, Brightness is going to affect the brightness of a particular color. So it's either going to darken it or brighten it. And a good way to actually see which mode you're in is actually the sliders themselves. The sliders give us some indication of what's going to happen here. So, for example, if we wanted to make our blues a bit darker, we could do that. Then there's the hue tab. Hue moves the color from basically from the color it is to an adjacent color, either warmer or cooler in the spectrum. I guess the way to understand this would be if all of our colors in our image here are that are selected in the sky are predominantly blue, we could make them more purple by sliding them into the purple side of the spectrum, or more cyan by pulling them into the cyan end of the spectrum. And then finally here we have contrast, and contrast is going to increase the contrast in your color when you pull it further to one of these sides here. Contrast, I find, is one of those things you want to move very subtly, because as you can see, if I increase it, it actually increases the noise in your section of your image here. So, point being, within the tune and detail tabs, you have masking. Masking is going to apply selective adjustments based on specific criteria. The criteria in Tune tab obviously is hue and brightness, so color and brightness in our image. And then from here, we have a series of like very, very powerful sub tools. So there's the general adjustments, there's the color EQ adjustments, which give us the ability to interact with saturation, looks like brightness, hue, and contrast. And then tone curves, which allow us to either address curves predicated on the brightness of our image, R, G, and B values. Notice also that because even though we've made an AI selection, we still have the ability to erase particular parts of our image effect. So I have these nib controls here, and if I wanted to erase the effect from my from this part of our image here, I can do that by just right-clicking and going through and erasing. It's actually giving me a bit of grief right now, and I don't know why. There we go. Anyway, point is I can erase it from other parts of my image here as well. So if I wanted to apply that mask to just this sky portion here, you can see that I've erased a small portion down here. Yeah. So CB asked, can you add further masks? So in this case here, we're in the Tune tab and we have one mask that's applying a series of fairly complicated adjustments together. The adjustments that it's applying are things like, hey, exposure is being adjusted. We know that saturation is being adjusted in the color EQ. We know there's a tone curves adjustment, etc. This is only one mask that's being applied to the corresponding area. We can see the mask that it's being applied to when we hover over this little guy right here, which is the little brush application. Even though that this mask started with an AI search for the sky, it's being interpreted as a brush adjustment because it's editable with the brush. Underneath this mask section, there's a series of buttons that give us more control over our developments. For one, we can actually add another mask. So to answer CB's question right away, if we add another mask and we say, okay, I want to add another mask, but I want it to be specifically, I need it to be a brush mask. I can click here. Another brush is added. And then from here, I can make, further brush adjustments, say further adjustments that I wanted to the sky. Let's say I want to increase the contrast. So that's awful. There we go. But you can see my point is that I can adjust those values here. So now I have the corresponding mask associated with this contrast adjustment, as well as the associated mask dealing with the sort of color of the sky in this case. Um, from here, I can also delete masks. So I could delete that contrast mask. I can copy a currently selected mask, and this one can be applied to a new mask, which is what this paste button does. I can duplicate a mask altogether and maybe tweak certain elements of the duplicated mask. I can invert the currently selected mask, and what that's going to do is it's going to take the actual spatial relationship of the mask selection and it's going to apply the inverse of it. So if I invert this currently selected mask, it's going to be applied to that area versus that area. I can preview or disable it. So if I disable a mask, it's going to be turned off entirely. But I can preview it by turning it back on. I can clear the mask, so I can remove the actual, I guess, the highlighted area here. And then finally, I can apply something called pixel targeting, which, given the time we have in this workshop, is not something I can cover in today's workshop. But just note that we have further refinement tools in pixel targeting. Okay, so we've talked about masking within those tools. What we haven't talked about is, let me just turn this mask off for the time being. We haven't talked about the general tools within the Tune tab. So the general tools themselves are things like exposure, highlights, fill light, contrast, saturation, but these are applied to the whole image rather than the masking adjustments, which are applied to the selection. And then within this, we also have other tools that apply to just the colors in the image universally. Things like white balance, light EQ, which gives us control over the brightness of our image, color EQ, color wheel, tune wheels, etc. There's a lot of different tools to play around with this, but knowing that the masking tools are actually different and selective versus the general tools, which appear beneath it, are a really big deal. One of the things I'd like to talk about before we leave off, Adam, in develop mode, can we blur part of an image? Yes, I believe you can. One moment. Would it be under? Let me see. Give me one moment. This is actually a great question. General clarity. I want is the opposite of clarity blur? Yes. Opposite of clarity is blur. So we could utilize clarity functionalities, but I think there might be a better way to do that. Let me just see if I'm not missing it. Soft focus would still apply. Soft focus applies a blur, but it's also going to keep whatever is in focus. So something to note. And then let's see if there's a photo effect that would apply a blur. So there's two options right there. Let me see if there's also one in detail. Sharpening. Is there a way to do the opposite of sharpening? Look in detail, he says. Would there be a way to do the opposite of sharpening? Noise reduction is going to apply a noise reduction adjustment. That's going to, and sharpness, it does not look, if I increase the threshold and lower the amount, no, it doesn't look like it. So you increase the radius and remove the mask. Yeah, it would seem that the best tools at hand, unless I'm missing anything, which just given the question right away, I might be, but I would apply probably it looks like a general application in either undo clarity, or I would engage with soft focus as just a way to blur right away. Within masking, you could do that as well by reducing the clarity in this image. Yeah, or reduce detail. Let's see if. And this is not a mask, so it should be being applied right now. No, it doesn't look like it. This is a really good question. So detail reduced, threshold increased. No, it doesn't. I think it has to be one of those other tools. Okay. So one of the things I wanted to point out just before I close up this workshop today is good question, John. Also, I might need to actually look into that because I don't know, but just a couple options to play around with either with masking or as universal adjustments. Thank you, Marv. The last thing I want to note, this is a really big one. So if you're still paying attention and this is a really, really good thing to remember. Presets can be saved based on our adjustments that we've made. So if I happen to really like the adjustments that I'm working with, okay, what I can do is I can go to the presets bar and I can save a preset. So the purpose of this is not to deal or interact with this particular image, but to actually apply a series of adjustments to other images based on these changes. So if I liked these changes and I wanted to apply them, where this might be really beneficial is when you take photography with very similar lighting conditions. If you're a wedding photographer, if you're doing fashion photography, you might want to adjust one image and then see how a preset can be applied to a series of images so you don't have to go through the process of editing each image individually. Rather, taking those presets, applying them, and then tweaking them as necessary. So the presets that are saved are the ones that that you choose, basically. So if I go to save preset here, if I just select all of these adjustments will be saved, regardless of whether or not they contain information. So, for example, even though that I have light EQ clicked here, you can see that light EQ, because there's no blue light next to the light EQ here, you can see that there's no adjustments applied. So when I select all of them, it'll only be the adjustments that have corresponding effects. So in this case, I have a general and a masking adjustment in tune. In detail, we know that we had a couple adjustments there, and then it looks like nothing was changed in geometry and repair. So just by default, if I select all, unless there was one particular effect that I really didn't want, in which case I would go through and I just make sure to unclick the ones that I don't want. And then I can save this corresponding preset. I'll just save this lighting test example and click OK. And then if I navigate back to manage mode and I was to find an image like this, for example, I could take these last whole row of adjustments here. I could take the second row here, and I can go to batch adjustments, batch developments, based on whatever that one was. So I believe it was light example, right? Light test example. So I could take this preset that I've saved and I can develop those images based on this preset. And so it's going to apply these development adjustments to all of these corresponding images on the bottom row here. It's going to take a sec for the thumbnail to appear, but you can see that lighting adjustment has been applied. And so from there, you can see all of these images now have a corresponding development icon with those changes live in them. That means that when I navigate to the file, I just select all the images. You can select all the images by clicking and dragging a box, or you can click and hold Shift like that. You can also click, hold Shift, and you can hold Control to add some ones that are in the fringes here. So there's a couple different methods by which you can select all there. If I was to navigate to an image and open it in develop mode, you can see that those adjustments will be applied. So even though this is not the same raw image, I can go into this image and I can see those adjustments live right there. Okay, so we covered a lot today. I always feel like this workshop is particularly hard to do everything at once, and I wish I could go into a bit more depth on certain things, but this should give you a really awesome, dense discussion about develop mode. So we talked about raw editing, what you can and can't do with raw files, why develop mode is a better raw editor because it allows you to preserve those qualities for longer. We talked about sidecar files, just how to interpret and how to understand how develop mode makes its adjustments. We talked specifically about lens corrections, just because it's one of the functionalities that really relates to raw images as far as it pertains to geometry of your image. And then we also talked about parametric filter editing. So we talked about all these different filters, how they're applied at the same time. We talked broadly about what the filters do. We made a point to sort of highlight the difference between masking and just generalized adjustments. We talked about how masking works and what masks you can apply versus as well adding multiple masks to the same image at once. We just briefly talked about sort of the more general applications. But again, you sitting around in develop mode for, half an hour, you could figure out what a lot of these tools do just by playing around with the filters, the actual sliders themselves. And then finally, we just talked about presets, which is the application of a an adjustment pre, based on going to batch and batch developments. And then we can save that preset that we made using the cogwheel up at the top of the filter mode in develop mode. So right here. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Freddie. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, David. Thank you, Armando. Thank you, Norman. Thank you, Rick. So really early on, I know that there's more questions. If you have a question, move it to Q&A. Really early on, somebody asked, and I apologize, I've forgotten the name. What is an ACDSee file? I'm going to answer that question for you. So let me clear my throat, have a bit of coffee here. So an ACDSee file, great question. Okay, I have a guy here. It's just a JPEG image. An ACDSee file is a file that contains edit mode, not develop mode, edit mode adjustments. Specifically, an ACDSee file is non-destructive, and it's going to contain things like masks, adjustment layers. It's going to contain multiple layers, as well as any like active selections or anything like that we have. So let's give you an example. Here's our guy here. I want to make a selection of our subject. Okay. And then I want to mask our subject. So our subject's masked. We have a blank background. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a file as a layer. I'm going to add a new background to our image here. So I'm going to go into my pictures folder, wherever it may be. Where is my pictures folder? Ah, here it is. Go into pictures. Let's find just a landscape image. Let's see if we have a tropical one for this. Yeah. Put a tropical image in the background. We have our guy. He's got his shades. He's in. It's really needs some editing, obviously. But point is we have a image that we've created here. We've masked our subject. We've added a new background. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to save this as an ACDSee file. And then I'm going to save it as a JPEG file. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new folder here. We're going to do ACDSee versus JPEG, say. Okay. We're going to go into this folder and we're going to save this AI actions 002. We're just going to save it as guy example. I'm going to save this as an ACDSee file format. ACDSee file formats should be default in ACDSee. Going to save it. And then I'm going to take the exact same guy file thing and I'm going to save it as a JPEG file. And we're going to look at the differences. Here's a JPEG. Okay. So here's our folder. We have our two guys. I'm going to open up this JPEG in edit mode. Oops, not develop mode, edit mode. Okay. Guy, edit mode, boom. We open it up. I want you to look at the layer panel and tell me what you see. You only see the one layer. It's because this has been flattened, because JPEGs cannot contain multiple images. They can't contain adjustments. They can't contain masks. Let's look at this ACDSee file. Same file. Different content. I have that mask. I have our first image. I have the landscape image beneath it. All of this is saved within the ACDSee file. Does this mean that ACDSee files are larger? Sure does. This is going to be a much larger file, but it contains all of the adjustments that we've made that are non-destructive adjustments. Non-destructive adjustments are typically adjustments that we make on this right-hand side panel here, right? Which differs from filters, but that's a bit beside the point of this workshop. But the point is again, I'm not sure who asked this question, but ACDSee files are non-destructive editing files that contain the layers and adjustments that you've made to the files. Other files like TIFFs, PNGs, JPEGs, they will not contain those files. ACDSee files are proprietary files that we, ACDSee, create and that give you the ability to obviously create in this case. They're not open up, you can't open them in other programs. They can only be opened up in ACDSee. They will only be interpreted in ACDSee. They are not of, there's no point CB of a ACDSee file format in develop mode. None. Or I mean, you can create one, I believe. Let's see. Actually, this is a great question. I think you can create one, but I don't think there's any reason to. Let's see if you even can. Yeah, you can't. Okay, so forget that. ACDSee files are relevant to edit mode only. They're relevant to edit mode only because they handle layers, and edit mode is the only mode in ACDSee that creates and can handle layers. So this is no correlation whatsoever to develop mode. Develop mode is not something we're talking about when we talk about ACDSee file, which was the point of the question from earlier, only pertains to edit mode. Okay, great question. Tony asked, is there a way to have the profile automatically applied rather than have to apply individually or batch? Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't think it's treated as default. I really wish that was the case. Let's just quickly find out. I think this might be a developer question. Perhaps there's a setting that you can turn on that I'm unaware of. But it might be a really good subject to talk to a one of the developers over the Connect page and just be like, hey, because that sounds like a feature to me. Like that should be something you can add in the options window that just says automatically apply this lens correction if it exists, right? My guess is no, but if I was to go into this raw image, for example, develop it, is that already applied? Yeah, the lens correction isn't automatically applied. That strikes me as something that's quite an easy feature to add to ACDSee. I would recommend just firing a suggestion to the developer on the Connect page. There's that section there for it, that exact question. Let me show you where this is. Because something like this is really easy for them to add because it's essentially an options menu addition. But yeah, if you go to feature requests and developer Q&A, this is a great thing to suggest there. Okay, I don't really want to scroll up a bunch of chat. If anyone else has any questions, can you add them to the Q&A panel? Yeah, if anyone has any further questions that they want answered, just fire them under Q&A. I can scroll up a little bit. But Tony, thank you so much. Misty, thank you. Chuck, thank you. Mike, thank you so much. Murray, thank you. Michelle, thank you. So awesome. John, thank you. Freddie, thank you. Again, if you can add these to Q&A, that'd be great. It's a separate window you can open up from the options. But Michael asked, if I scan a film, what is the best way to save? If I scan film, what is the best way to save? Oh, I see. Film as in film reel or film as in a photo film? Just to be clear, so I'm understanding. You mean photo film most likely. Thank you, bud. Yeah, TIFF is going to be your best bet. Thank you, Wayne. So a TIFF is, as far as like a general savable file, like general meaning something that anyone can open. Things like TIFFs, PNGs, JPEGs, GIFs, AVI files. These are files that like anyone with any operating system can open. It doesn't really matter if you scan as negative or positive if you intend to open up and edit in ACDSee. Keep in mind, if you have a film negative, film negatives can be made into film positives with like a really quick one-step process. You can just apply a negative. So a negative will make, if your image is a negative, applying a negative to a negative makes it a positive. If your image is a positive, applying a negative to it makes it a negative. That makes sense. So it's a simple one step. Now, if you have the opportunity with your scanner to scan it as a positive, probably scan it as a positive, I guess. I don't know. It's really up to you. It might be worse interpretation than a photo editing software can interpret it as, but you'd really have to play around with those. Ultimately, yes, I would save it as a TIFF file because it's going to be the largest file size you can, while still being a generalized file. Um, yeah, that's a pretty good question. I probably wouldn't scan it as a JPEG if the file size really mattered to me. It's probably going to give you the opportunity to scan it in at like 300 or 600 DPI or something like that. Obviously, the bigger the DPI, the larger the file size is going to be. Typically 300 is considered print size. So print size being something that you could print and have the dots per inch or pixels per inch be represented well, not pixelated. 600 is going to be better. It's going to be denser. It's obviously going to be huge. The file is going to be enormous. If it isn't over 50 megabytes, I would be surprised. Yeah. Uh, I take it as a negative is not the same as converting to black and white. No, no. Negative would be when you so when you take image your film photography to a place that processes the film photography. You're going to be given A positives of your image. That's typically what you get in that little envelope. But then in addition to that, you're also going to get a reel of negatives. They'll always give you the negatives, and it's much smaller. It's like a little thin thing of like almost gold looking images, typically gold because you're taking photos of a blue sky or, you know, it's gonna be like a dark gold, almost like an orange. And that film negative, as what Michael's asking is, he wants to scan that, and by scanning that, he can scan it. It sounds like as a negative. To clarify my question, if I saved a scan as a TIFF file, can it be layered? No, can't be. Um, oh wait, can it? Well, if you open up in edit mode, you can open up a TIFF in edit mode and make adjustments to it. But when you've made those adjustments, if you want to be able to interact with those layers in the future, right? You can you have to save it as an ACDSee file. But an ACDSee file can, oh, sorry, an ACDSee can open a TIFF in edit mode. For example, I can even just show you this right now. I'm just going to convert this file right away. Let's see here. Can I convert this really quickly? I just want to convert this to a TIFF. I don't want an AVI. I want a TIFF file, and this is fine. It's in the same folder. Um, 2025. I want to just put this in the 2024 folder. Sure. I'm going to save this as a TIFF 2024 folder, convert it. It's going to just add it to this list here. So you can see, Michael, that I have a TIFF here. A TIFF is indicated by the little icon right here. You can see that a TIFF can be opened up in edit mode, right? So I can edit this file. I could make it into a positive if I wanted to. And then when prompted, I would be forced to save it as an ACDSee file if I wanted to hold on to all these layers. Otherwise, I could save, it as a TIFF and I could flatten it. TIFF files are, they can be saved destructively, I guess. Excuse me. Um, can metadata file changes be stored in sidecar file? Mm, yes. Yeah, metadata is added to a sidecar file in the case of raw images because a raw image will not provide you the ability to make metadata adjustments to your image because they're not writable. I believe that would be the case, Chuck. Yes. Must sidecar files be embedded like metadata? No. Um, they do not need to be embedded like metadata because embedded metadata is embedded within the file type itself. I believe. So the sidecar file automatically contains those adjustments, those edits, that sort of thing. You don't need to go through the embedding process in the same way. Embedding is useful when it comes to metadata because it gives that JPEG or whatever writable file the ability for that image to be written to the file, which then can be withdrawn from the file in the future. Typically, you embed metadata so you can convert your database predicated on cataloging a file. So you would catalog the file. You would say, hey, this file contains information that I've embedded to it, like categories, keywords, ratings, whatever. And I want to pull that information from it. But because raw files are not writable, you can't write anything to them. So they're not they would that would have to be saved in a sidecar file, not the actual file itself. So I believe the answer to your question, Murray, is no. Um, okay. Does anyone else have any other questions before I close up today? Thank you, everybody, so much for participating in the workshop. I'm sorry it ran a little bit long today. At the end of a session, I get asked to embed metadata out of all files, which takes a lot of time. Yeah, embedding metadata takes time. You're making changes to your images. People typically allow auto embed to occur. I believe that's an option within the tools function. Uh, Rather than having to state that you want it to apply at the end of every session. Um, Metadata, you want to know why metadata should be added. It's a good question. So metadata, at least with the metadata we're talking about right now, right, is like ratings, labels, so keywords that you're adding to it in categories, that sort of thing. The reason why ACDSee asks you to embed this metadata is it's trying to create a system where you are backing up your information. I'm going to give you some hypotheticals and explain why this matters. When you start ACDSee and you're using it for the first time, there's going to be a database that's created, and a database is going to contain it's by default you're going to have a database, and it's going to contain all these ratings, these keywords, these labels, these categories, all this information that you add to in ACDSee. It's going to be added to that database. That database, in the event that you lose that database, um, say your hard drive crashes and you lose that database, you will have lost all those ratings, those keywords, those labels that are applied to your images when you're editing. So one of the things that ACDSee does to prevent this type of loss is it asks you to embed information in the files that it can embed in. So it's going to ask you when you make editing adjustments like labels and ratings and keywords and etc. It's going to ask you to embed them at the end of a session. There's this little icon that appears in the bottom left-hand corner of your image. This is an embed pending icon. This means that this has information that you've added to it, but it has not yet been written to the file. It has not yet been embedded. Why would you embed something? Because in the event that you've lost your database, you've lost all that information, right? It's gone. So what you need to do is, if you've embedded your information in your files, you can reconstruct your database using the files themselves. So what I could do is I could go to tools, I could go to database, I believe, and I can catalog a file. And when I catalog a file, and again, this is to prevent loss of all this information. That's the only function it serves. But what I could do is I could catalog a file predicated upon EXIF and IPTC metadata. So this is general metadata. I can also catalog ACDSee metadata, which includes categories, keywords, tags, collections, and then I can also incorporate face data, including face outlines and names. So I can reconstruct my database using the file themselves based on having this file, but only in the event that I've embedded that information to the file previously. So case scenario is you have a hard drive that contains external hard drive that contains your photos that you've been embedding the metadata to. Your computer explodes in a horrific accident and you lose your database forever, but you have access to all of that external hard drive with that embedded metadata. So you can take every single one of your files you've ever embedded information to, and you can just catalog them and then reconstruct your database from those files. It is an emergency function. It's also a function to ensure that you're backing up your adjustments. You're backing up the choices that you aim to do in ACDSee things like metadata and adjustments. It yeah. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. If you have any other questions in regards to that, uh, Marv, if you have any questions in regards to that, I'll try to answer it over Connect. Just PM me personally, and I'll get to the bottom of any other question. But yeah, that is the general idea. Let's see here. Yeah, Chuck says if I only change one photo, it appears to process all photos. It's gonna process any photos that have pending metadata from previously. Because it's going to go through all of them and just it's going to because you will have images that will have pending metadata from previous sessions, and so it's going to go through and address all of them then.